Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. We're going to talk a little bit about the former president.
Yeah.
Not the one that we have right now.
No.
We don't know enough about him. He's still hiding.
He's still hiding, yeah.
But we'll learn more about him. We have an inkling about what he's all about.
Yeah,
but you know, there's been a lot of distortion about that other guy. I think his name was Trump.
Yeah.
You know, does he tell the truth? Is he a good guy? Is he really with the people? And media loves him, and you know, this sort of thing. But something came up this week that surprised a lot of people. Surprised me, because usually, you know, the mainstream media never backs down, no matter how outrageous they are. But the story was that Washington Post issued an apology for overstating or misstating, you know, an activity that activity showed Trump in a bad light in order to get more information to make sure he got impeached. And that was, this incident was introduced in the trial. But Trump was said to have told other people when it came to Georgia, go find them. There's fraud out there.
Yeah.
And I guess it was tone and the inference and how it was spun, but it was considered really, really a bad strategy for Trump.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, compared to other stuff, I kept thinking, is it really that bad? But the media, everybody conceded it was that bad. But can you believe it? It wasn't even true.
Yeah.
But it was used, and politically it was hurtful, you know, to Trump.
Sure.
But main thing is the mainstream media went with it, the Democrats with it. And I know when that was happening, that whole mess that was going on over this first and second impeachment, they really hate this guy. You know, this is when I decided they weren't just annoyed with him. They really hated him, and they would go to all extremes, and they were sort of blindly would strike out. But here, it looks like Trump might on this incident have the last laugh, because they wrote this apology and published it, which is pretty strange that they and the details are there how they took substance and they said, oh yeah, it was an anonymous report.
Yeah.
and they looked at this and they used that information to make the charges. But now maybe they think they can get some good points. At the same time, it doesn't matter anymore. Trump's gone, so it won't matter. And they probably want to make themselves look a little more credible. I don't know what their motivations were, but I know what they have been for, you know, last several years on the reporting of everything Trump did or didn't do.
Yeah, that's the thing. It made the rounds. It made the rounds at a critical time and established the narrative. And you're right, they accused him of a crime. They accused Trump of obstruction of justice by, quote, interfering with an election official in Georgia, telling him, you know, you better go find the fraud, which obviously he didn't do because it was an anonymous source that hadn't been checked by the Washington Post. And here, if we can put up the picture, I would only quibble with you a little bit, Dr. Paul, because it wasn't an apology, it was just a correction. They're not sorry, they just got caught.
Yeah.
2 months after the fact, when all the damage was completely done, because as soon as the Washington Post ran with it, of course, all the other mainstream publications ran with it as well. Trump is attempting to obstruct. See, this reinforces the narrative that everything said about potential election fraud is completely bogus, and that's what they had to do at the time. And the mainstream media did that as well. And Glenn Greenwald, a real journalist, pointed it out in some tweets yesterday when this came out. This is exactly what the New York Times did about the death of Brian Sicknick, remember, who was a Capitol Hill police officer. They ran with unsourced information, anonymously sourced information, that he had his head smashed in with a fire extinguisher by the insurrectionists. Turns out that was completely bogus, but by the time that was corrected, several weeks had passed and the narrative had already been established. These were maniacal lunatics out to overthrow the government, and they would kill anything in their path, including police officers. Totally untrue. So this is what they do over and over again, and it's ironic, and Greenwald writes about this as well, it's ironic that it's the alternative and independent media that's always attacked for spreading misinformation, Why do these mainstream publications who do this on a regular basis never get dinged? They never get kicked off social media. Twitter's never going to kick the Washington Post off for spreading misinformation. They always get away with it.
Yeah. Well, you know, they had the disposition of the body rather quickly, and they never could follow up. Yeah. Was he really beaten to death? And I think a relative, whether
he called his brother that night.
Yeah,
when he was
well, I think
supposed
real recently somebody came up and said that he was not beaten with anything, and the police weren't involved in doing that. So this is something that is ongoing, but it falls into the category of, especially with the distortions of what's going on during the pandemic and what government does and does not, and who's at fault and what they need to do, and you can go to prison if you say it's a hoax. And it supports the position that a lot of people in this country, including myself, that governments are quite capable of lying almost all the time.
Yeah,
and it isn't like only one party lies. I think when you're sympathetic more with one philosophy and all, you might say, oh no, there's no question that one side lies more than the other. But some of the big lies, like going to war and different things like that, or putting people in prison, it seems to be a bipartisan thing. And the people have justification for not believing what the government tells them, and that leads to chaos, because it's the noise and the corruption that rules the day, and they get the bailouts and they get taken care of, and the country sinks deeper and deeper. And I talk a whole lot about the financial crisis, but I think it's the crisis of the immoral standards that the people have, and the people that will lie and distort and try to set people up and do all the things that politicians do. That's probably the biggest problem. But I think there's a natural tendency for some people to do that. But the people who like power are more likely to gravitate to the positions of power, and they're more likely to be the biggest liars in order to stay. The worse the situation gets, the more lies they have to tell, and the bigger the lies. And this has been ongoing. I mean, Trump has his problem and invited a lot of the mess we have. But I tell you what, when you look at the FBI and the Justice Department and the media, that had to be a lot to withstand as an individual, because he didn't have a whole lot of people. He had crowds, and nobody knows whether the crowds are still there or not, but he had a lot of support. That probably kept him going. But when it comes to the official endorsement by the establishment or the government and the Justice Department, they were more likely to be the enemies and friends that try to take care of this mess.
Yeah, and it's interesting. A couple of things that are, I think, particularly interesting. First off, here's a great summary of what happened, because it's pretty easy to follow. And this is actually written by a friend of mine, Mark Hemingway, in the Federalist. He and I were actually both journalism fellows together many moons ago. But he sums it up very well. In sum, the Washington Post anonymously printed fabricated quotes they knew were from a second-hand source in the office of a political enemy. They couldn't confirm the quotes with additional sourcing, but they still attributed them to the sitting President of the United States. They used those quotes as a basis to speculate that the President had committed a crime, and the Democratic Party would later repeatedly cite the bogus article when attempting to impeach Trump for high crimes and misdemeanors. That's a very good summary of what happened, and it's very ugly. This is something that's journalism 101. You probably wouldn't even see this in a junior high school newspaper, this kind of shoddy journalism. But it wasn't shoddy, it wasn't slipshod, it was for a reason, and it was on purpose. And interestingly enough, this misattribution was similar in the first impeachment trial. And this also just came out yesterday, and it didn't get the attention that it should have gotten. But you remember the whole Ukraine gate quid pro quo. There was a phone call where Trump got on with Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, and said, hey, if you do this, we'll do that. Help my campaign. That whole thing turns out to be bogus in the way that was reported, because the information has now come out that Colonel Vindman, remember him, Ukrainian American, interestingly enough, had been offered the defense ministry position in Ukraine 3 times separately. He was the only one in on the call, and of course, speaking Ukrainian, he's the only one that understood what happened. He misrepresented it, or he passed it on to the so-called whistleblower in the intelligence community, who then blew the whistle on it and knew that it was fake. So the same thing, the media ran with fake information as if it were true. They didn't look into it. And so we're seeing for both impeachment trials the same kind of fake mainstream media reporting, and the goal was to do anything to get rid of Trump. And we've always said there are plenty of things they could have done to make him look bad, but this was absolute lies.
You know, if this kind of activity occurred in a private industry, I think there would be room in there for recourse, you know, in the courts, because they're lying. And yet, when you're in the political arena, obviously or evidently, there is no recourse. But technically, you know, it seems like there should be, and the only thing there is you have to go and try to correct it with the population and the voting and you run again and this sort of thing. But when they control the media, it's tough winning your fight, and that's why even though this wasn't the perfect victory, it was still worthwhile. That at least he called attention to it, that it didn't hurt Trump. They've done enough to hurt him. At least they say, you know, Trump probably, you mean you're telling me that Trump was telling the truth for this circumstance? Yeah. So that's a benefit to him.
And what's interesting is that actual reporters and talented journalists like Glenn Greenwald, Matt Taibbi, and Michael Tracy, they are going over to new media outlets like Substack, and they've all gone to Substack, and it's driving, of course, the mainstream media crazy. The mainstream media is clamoring for Substack to censor its writers, and the reason why is that these guys are doing actual reporting. Neither of the three of these guys likes Trump at all, right? But they're not repeating the mainstream lies. So they're this cutting out the middleman and just reporting directly. And actually, how Substack works is you can subscribe to it. You can pay $5 a month to help support journalists you like. So in a way, you're voting with your dollars for journalists that you like. You're cutting out the middleman, and you're creating real journalism, and it's driving the mainstream media crazy. They're desperate to have it.
The thing I always worry about, and this has happened not too long ago, is that when a conservative-leaning outlet is very, very successful, and then all of a sudden it gets sold. It's, you know, the money that they can get for this. The enemy wants it so they can neutralize it, and you know which website I'm talking about. You know, and they can do that, and they get money and make a lot of money. That's sad. So this organization that they're going to, it's probably not big enough to worry about that, but that's always a concern because it's part of human nature. And because I saw it in politics all the time that they'd be very rigid. But then, I want to be a senator, and I don't want to just be a congressman in this district. Then all of a sudden, they give up their beliefs, you know, and switch over. Their allegiances change. And but as long as, and right now, I still think there are those outlets, and new ones are created, and hopefully they keep growing. But there are some people who are very, very pessimistic about this. You're a dreamer if you think you're going to compete, you know, with the big guys who really controls the mainstream media.
Well, the one silver lining in this whole mess is that thankfully this means the mainstream media has even less credibility, and that's a good thing because they're a bunch of liars. But we should move on to something a little bit more cheerful because we do have a good news story, and you found it first, so I'll let you introduce it.
This one's pretty neat. And are we going to
We have some video, yeah.
Okay, let me just talk a little bit about it because the video is good, and if the whole thing doesn't play on our program, they should look it up and listen to it.
Yeah.
Because we've even toured the idea of maybe getting the superintendent of schools. This is a school that defied all the rules. Last August, when they had a new set of the rules and schools were opening, this is the way you would open. It was in Peaster, and it's a little town in the country, and it's not too far from Fort Worth. And and they had they weren't looking forward to this. So they had a type of a poll referendum in their community. The whole district has 1,400, so it's not puny, but it's not big like a big city. So the people were, I guess, much closer in understanding. So I had to poll, and 84% of them said, open it up.
Yeah.
And what impressed me most was when they were going through this process of whether they should take the chance of the big guys coming in and arresting somebody, is they sensed and already knew, even though so much more is known now, their big concern was for the kids. You know, and they indicated the kids would not do well, and they probably had evidence of that. But parents came in and they corresponded, and that was the reason the people went along with this, and they just didn't follow the rules, and the results have been really good. You know, the kids get behind, the school stayed open, and the teachers went along with it too. You know, in a big city where the teachers are more aggressive, they wouldn't do this. So in a smaller town, and thinking about the kids and thinking about education, guess what? Don't lock down. And a few of them might have remembered that there had been mild epidemics over our history, and they never had to do this. And a little common sense snuck in the door and peace there. They need to be congratulated.
Well, Lance Johnson is the superintendent's name, and I consider him a hero. He's a guy who stood up in difficult times, didn't put his finger up to the wind like so many politicians did. He stood for the people that he was in charge of, which are the kids, the students in the district. Not only did they not lock down and go to online only, they didn't have mask requirements, they didn't have distancing requirements, they had none of that. They simply opened it up, and let's in fact look, let's look at a few seconds of this video to watch a little bit about what happened.
ISD, which is in Parker County, will not be one of the districts making a new plan because they never required masks in school in the first place. There has been no distancing either, no mandatory quarantines. And Jason Allen asked today how they've done it.
At Peaster Schools Monday, high school athletes were working out on the track. Elementary students had recess together on the playground with no masks required. And it's been that way since school started last summer.
And the kids in Peaster, Texas have thrived.
And what he said is there were a few teacher absences, and then when the kids got sick, they'd stayed home and they came back to school when they were better. And they had a couple COVID cases, I guess, over the fall, a couple sicknesses. They stayed home. There are no cases of COVID-19 in the first 10 weeks of school among students or staff this year. It was not a problem for them. They thrived, and they also said that unlike most of the school districts in this country where the kids have been so ill-served by cowardly adults, these kids did not fall behind, and he said they've actually closed some of the learning gaps from previous closures.
Right. You know, if I had a chance to interview our governor, one question I'd ask him is, why would you not use a town like this as an example to study? It's built in order for you to look at it and see why. And why haven't you tried it? Why didn't you use common sense?
Yeah.
They figured it out themselves, and they had to overcome, you know, the systematic high pressure, you know, of the establishment that you're accused of all sorts of things if you don't do this. And I don't know whether he'd have an answer. He probably wouldn't let me interview him.
He probably wouldn't. Yeah. He probably wouldn't. But it's, you know, hats off to the people up there for having the courage. I have to say, I don't even want to say it again, but I'll say it again. Unfortunately, from what we see in Brazoria County down here, they don't have that same kind of guts. The mask wearing here is still 99%. People are still running around like this. It's really sad. I wish they would. Of course, people that need to wear it, of course, they may feel differently. But come on, I mean, this is ridiculous.
That's good. I have another item that I'd like to bring up because it has to do with the FBI, one of my least favorite organizations.
Oh, they're going to get you.
Well,
that's it.
This is the least favorite. But you know, when I learned to put my antennas up with the FBI, is when they would get involved in investigating, you know, these commissions to investigate how did such and such happen, how did he get assassinated, and before you knew it, it was pretty messy on what happens there. But I've looked at the history of J. Edgar Hoover for a long time, and he was FBI before there was an FBI,
Yeah.
you know, and he was there for a long, long time. And I think everybody knew. You know, you'd hear terrible stories about J. Edgar Hoover, you know, just in conversation. I said, well, why don't they get rid of him? They said, and they would tell me when I would talk to some people in politics, they said, he has too much on everybody.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's why that's why they said, I think 5 presidents threatened to fire him. But they kept saying he has too much on him. So the FBI came into existence under very shady circumstances, and I don't think there's any doubt that the FBI was after
Kennedy?
No, he was after the our black leader.
Oh, Martin Luther King. Yeah,
Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
So many boulevards, you'd think I couldn't forget that. No, and no, he was after him, and there was one story said he tried to get Martin Luther King to commit suicide. All this stuff that went on, and yet he has this building, and when he died, it was during Ford's term that they named the building after him, and also you know the FBI is. You know, investigations, I think, should be legitimate, but I don't think we need the FBI. And they say, well, how could that be? Haven't we had the FBI since George Washington? No, we haven't. Matter of fact, it actually became more official in the 30s, and then a lot more so after World War II. And now we have massive surveillance. And just think about the most recent history when you think about Russiagate, Justice Department and the FBI and what they did, and nobody's ever punished for this. You know, and yet people do suffer, and they pick on people, and they were, I guess, somebody that sort of made himself vulnerable was the president, and he had a tough time. But I think as time goes on, they're going to realize that the FBI is not so hot. But anyway, 2 members of Congress, Jerry Connolly from Virginia and Steve Cohen, Tennessee, I think, they've introduced separate bills to change the name. It's cancel. And I was telling Daniel a little while ago, because when I look at this, I keep thinking, would I write the bill? Would I support the bill? Would I vote for it? And I got to thinking, well, their motivations are about half of what my motivations would be. So I would vote for it to change it. But who are they going to name it after? You know, if it's another monster, you wouldn't, you know, you'd have to think it through. So the complete history isn't there. But they're going to change the name, and they don't have an individual to name it. They're just going to call it the FBI building or something like that. But I think that's. I think we ought to have a contest, Daniel, and see if we get some support, because I guess under the circumstances, we'd have to sort of get somebody that understands American history and American morality and legal, you know, Constitution, this sort of thing. So I have a couple suggestions to start with, and one would be Jonathan Turley.
Yeah, there you go.
And he's a friend, and I think he'd be pretty darn good. And also, I think Glenn Greenwald would be pretty good too. They're real. I think they're the reason they came across as not as partisans. And yet they were good journalists, because I don't think they ever broadcast. I don't even know if either one of them would ever say they're a Republican. They might say they're libertarian, but they probably don't. They want to be a journalist, and that's what you need. Is you need some independence there. But I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think we can get our friends named as operating. They might even resent the idea. They might. I don't need that notoriety.
Well, maybe they can name it after Ron Paul and then tear it down the next day. That would be some justice. Well, I'm going to close out now, and I'll just do what I say periodically, and I'll put a link in the description of the show today. But we'd love you to sign up for updates from the Ron Paul Institute, which sponsors the program. I'll show you how to do it. They're free updates. We don't sell your name. We don't give your name away. We respect your privacy. Just a way to keep communicating, because as you know, When you start trying to tell the truth as much as you can, you end up getting in trouble. So we want to be able to continue to communicate with you. Dr. Paul?
Very good. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. And the little story we told, a news clip that we told about Peaster, that original story for me came from Blaze, and so I got that information there. But I think that's such a good example in the midst of all the chaos and all the negative stuff and all the authoritarianism. There's a little place, a little town near Fort Worth, and unfortunately I can't claim that, Lake Jackson, and they're way ahead of the game. It's not that way. But Peaster is. Peaster did a fantastic job, and they have set an example. It's just too bad that more people don't understand what it's all about, because the authoritarianism is continuing, and the worse the conditions get in a moral situation and an economic situation, the more authoritarian the people become, and the more lies that have to be told. To maintain an empire, you have to have lies, and the lies get more frequent and more, excessive in order to keep it going. In a free society, that isn't the case. Hey, things are handled locally. The people take care of it. At Peaster, they didn't ask the county commissioner, they didn't ask the governor, they didn't ask the president, they didn't ask the Department of Justice, the FBI, or nobody. But they did get a bit of approval. They went to the people and did a little polling and talked. They found out that 84% of the people said, doesn't sound like we should. It sounds like a good idea, and we should do this, and we probably can do a better job than the dictates would be. The other thing that was fortunate in a little town like that is that the attitude by the school teachers was very well oriented to taking care of the kids, the understanding of the kids. When the teachers get together and say, we are not going to teach because it's dangerous, I don't know what they're talking about. I think their power is dangerous. That's what's usually the case when they say something is dangerous and we can't do that. They're worried about losing power and control no matter what organization or what part of government it is. But that has a lot to do with, with human nature. A lot of people, I've read just recently somebody who's a friend and knows what's going on, but boy, he was very, very negative, and I got to thinking, well, I can't say he doesn't have some justification, but I'm not that negative about it, and yet I don't know whether things can improve next month or next year. But if you don't believe it's possible, I don't know what will happen, but I do believe something sincerely, that if you use the right ideas and promote liberty, you're going to have a better result. So the fact that Peaster did this, I think it's safe to predict that the outcome of those kids will be so far superior to what's coming out of the big schools and the big cities and what's going on when people are living in the streets and all. So yes, there's a reason to be optimistic that if you do something in the direction of promoting peace and prosperity, it's going to be helpful. And as long as we're able to do that and we are able to speak out and reach the people, I believe that is our responsibility, and we should continue to do it and be optimistic that we will get more supporters as time goes along. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.